Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 87 Master. What in the world did that mean? Insioke, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, was momentarily dumbfounded by the green spirit Gyusoha's exclamation. It was none other than himself who had used the servant spirit creation technique, a secret art that forcibly turned ghosts into servant spirits. Yet the green spirit, born through the spirit god parasitic poisoning technique, suddenly called a boy who appeared to be around 17 or 18 years old his master. What on earth was going on? As he was thinking this, Jayongun, Diviner Zhou Yuigong shouted upon seeing mock Jayongun. At that shout, Jayongun. Did his disciple know that guy? While he was puzzled, Diviner Zhou Yuigong spoke in an excited voice. Master. That child is the one I told you about. What? The eyes of Insioke, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, narrowed. That guy was the child his disciple Zhou Yuigong said he had accepted into his sect? Wait a moment. But why was that child here? Shouldn't he be undergoing the trials at Corpse Blood Valley? Moreover, he couldn't understand why the green spirit called that guy master upon seeing him. That child. Swish. Diviner Zhou Yuigong was about to say something, but Insioke, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, raised his hand as if to stop him. Master. Let's see. Are you the child named Mok Jayongun? At this question from Insioke, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, Mok Jayongun looked at Diviner Zhou Yuigong. Then Diviner Zhou Yuigong sent a glance and spoke softly. He is your Grand Master and the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing. At those words, Mok Jayongun's eyes sparkled with interest. On the way to Heaven and Earth Society, Diviner Zhou Yuigong had briefly explained about the Primal Killing Pavilion, so he roughly knew what kind of people were in the valley. Was that old man who appeared to be in his 70s, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing? This is a diviner of a master rank. Mok Jayongun, who had opened his ghost eye, possessed eyes that could concretize energy. Therefore he could clearly see the immense spiritual power that unconsciously emanated from the old man. The difference is this vast. It seemed to be nearly 3 times more than Diviner Zhou Yuigong. He was not yet at a level he could handle. At this, Mok Jayongun put his hands together and bowed respectfully, saying, You are the elder of our sect. I am Mok Jayongun, who has been accepted under Master Zhou's tutelage. At this greeting from Mok Jayongun, Diviner Zhou Yuigong silently stared at him. On the other hand, the green spirit Gyusoha, whose face had brightened at the arrival of her master, had her eyes wide open. What does this mean? This spirit's master was a member of this old man's sect? Then did that mean he was related to those who had trapped her in this hellish place? If that was the case, it would be quite confusing. As she was thinking this, Insioke, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, opened his mouth. Repeat what you just said. At those words, Mok Jayongun, who had his hands together, tilted his head, then smiled brightly and said, You are an elder of our sect. Master Zhou's. Thud. Before Mok Jayongun could finish his sentence, Insioke, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, stamped the end of his staff on the ground. Then with a frightening expression he said, Are you trying to fool this Pavilion Master? No. How could that be? At that brazen remark, Diviner Zhou Yuigong became even more anxious. He knew this guy was bold and different from ordinary people, but the other party was his master and the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing. But what was with this attitude? Apologize to Pavilion Master at once. Zhou Yuigong raised his voice and urged. At this, Mok Jayongun lowered his head with his hands together and said, I apologize to the Pavilion Master. Although it sounded polite with no rise in his voice, something felt off. However, since he did as he was told, there was nothing more he could say, so Zhou Yuigong glanced at the face of his master, Insioke. Alas! As expected, his expression was not good. Just a moment ago he had shown a quite favorable reaction, so he had hoped that he could somehow get him out of Corpse Blood Valley. But now it was the complete opposite. At that moment, Insioke snorted and said, Did you say you were the master of this ghost? At that question, Diviner Zhou Yuigong frowned and looked at Mok Jayongun. Come to think of it, this guy had definitely said that earlier. I am its owner. What did that even mean? While he was puzzled, Mok Jayongun slowly raised his lowered head and said, Yes. Is there a problem with that? What? Zhou Yuigong's expression stiffened. Did this guy not deny it but affirm it just now? Then did he really make that green spirit, created through solitude by ghosts devouring each other, his servant spirit? How in the world? Wasn't this guy undergoing the trials at Corpse Blood Valley all this time? But by what means did he make this ghost his servant spirit? Moreover, a ghost is a servant spirit. Ah. Come to think of it, this guy had a ghost with a rank-reaching yellow spirit as his servant spirit. According to him, there was no special method, but the one who tried to possess his body was coincidentally captured and made into a servant spirit. Didn't he say that? Having confirmed the extent of the guy's magical knowledge, he had thought he was really lucky. But not only that, he said he made a ghost with a rank-reaching green spirit his servant spirit? How is this possible? That was not something that could be attributed to luck. Even his master, Insioke, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, had tried to use the forbidden secret art of the extinct Mozen sect to turn ghosts into servant spirits, hadn't he? Is that really? Command at once. Before diviner Zhou Yuigong could say anything, Insioke, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, spoke again. What do you mean? Anything is fine. Is he trying to confirm it? Insioke, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, seemed to want to directly confirm it. There were several ways to verify a servant spirit, but the simplest was for the master to give a command. At this, Mok Jiangun casually said, Soha, get up and come over here. Yes, master. As soon as Mok Jiangun's command was given, the green spirit Gyu Soha got up. And as if he had been waiting, he approached Mok Jiangun. Seeing this, diviner Zhou Yuigong clicked his tongue. Ha! It was true. The green spirit was really following the command. He had been quite surprised when it was a yellow spirit, but a green spirit was a ghost that even decent diviners found difficult to handle, yet he made it his servant spirit? Zhou Yuigong couldn't help but ask. How in the world did you do it? Do what? Are you pretending not to know now? You should have been undergoing the trials at Corpse Blood Valley, so how could you make that ghost, which was undergoing solitude, your servant spirit? At this question from Zhou Yuigong, Mok Jiangun shrugged his shoulders. Who knows? As I told you last time, I never really intended to do anything. At this answer from Mok Jiangun, diviner Zhou Yuigong's eyes narrowed. Last time he had thought it could really be a coincidence, but answering like that made it seem like he was hiding something. Oh my. You're trying to make a fool of this master now, aren't you? Then let's see if you still won't answer even like this. Diviner Zhou Yuigong formed hand seals, and he chanted a spell. The wheel turns and the stone breaks, all returns to the mirror, the meaningless child. At that moment, Mok Jiangun focused on where diviner Zhou Yuigong's gaze was directed. It was the iron shackle on Mok Jiangun's wrist. Seeing this, Mok Jiangun could guess in an instant that he was trying to do something through this iron shackle. As I thought. Wear that on your wrist and say this. I, Mok Jiangun, will become Zhou Yuigong's disciple and follow his will. What happens if I make that oath? A restriction is placed. Restriction. If you make that oath, you will not be able to harm me in any way. It is almost absolute. That was what diviner Zhou Yuigong had said. However, Mok Jiangun believed that there was definitely another hidden restriction here. And as he guessed, it seemed like he was about to reveal that restriction now. Hurry up. Diviner Zhou Yuigong pointed the Jumgangji seal at Mok Jiangun and cast a spell. Upon hearing the final, hurry up, Mok Jiangun realized, hurry up, meant that it had to be urgently executed like a command of the law. In other words, it was an expression to follow the order. So that's how it was. The restriction was to control him. He saw diviner Zhou Yuigong's gaze shift from the bracelet to his face. At this, Mok Jiangun, without showing any signs, put on a dazed expression as if his soul had left his body. Seeing this, the corners of Zhou Yuigong's mouth slightly curled up. From now on, you must answer my questions accurately. Yes. Mok Jiangun answered in a powerless voice. Seeing this, Insioke, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, looked at the iron shackle on his wrist and said, It's an iron shackle with an incantation. Yes, Master. As you can see, he has just become a disciple and is not yet controlled like a young colt, so I put it on him to tame him. At those words, Insioke snorted and scoffed. Among the disciples he had taught, the most cunning one who resembled him the most was Zhou Yuigong. As expected, he had taken appropriate measures. The iron shackle with an incantation could force one's will through self-restraint by making an oath. If you have any questions, please ask. Diviner Zhou Yuigong pointed at Mok Jiangun and said. Now, no matter what he asked, he would answer truthfully. Step. At these words, in Xiaoke, the pavilion master of primal killing, approached Mok Jiangun. Master. One must always verify if it's properly set. Then he swung the head of his staff and struck Mok Jiangun's face. Thwack. Mok Jiangun's head turned to the side. No matter how much martial arts he had learned, if he was hit while not circulating energy and in a defenseless state, he would naturally feel pain. He should have reacted in some way, but... Mok Jiangun showed no change in expression, as if he felt no pain at all. Even after being struck on the face with the head of the staff, if he was like this, it seemed his will was indeed restrained. However, in Xiaoke, the pavilion master of primal killing was cautious. Thwack. In Xiaoke struck the opposite side of the face with his staff. As if that wasn't enough, he kicked Mok Jiangun's abdomen with his foot and knocked him down. Thud. Master. There's no need to go that far. Wait. In Xiaoke, the pavilion master of primal killing climbed on top of Mok Jiangun's chest and stepped hard on his neck with one foot. As his neck was pressed down, blood vessels bulged on his face and his face turned red. However, there was still no change in Mok Jiangun's expression. If he pressed down a little more, his windpipe would be cut off. Yet he remained still. Gasp. After staring at this, in Xiaoke, the pavilion master of primal killing nodded as if he finally believed it and climbed down from Mok Jiangun's chest. Then he said to Diviner Zhou Yuigong, "Now ask the boy if he had entered the cliff valley." Understood. Jiangun, get up. Swish. Mok Jiangun silently got up from his spot with a dazed expression. Seeing his face covered in wounds, Diviner Zhou Yuigong clicked his tongue inwardly. Although he was his master, he was so cautious that he had no mercy in his hands. Well, he won't remember it when he comes to his senses. That was the power of the incantation shackle. Zhou Yuigong asked Mok Jiangun, "Did you enter the cliff valley where the solitude technique was being performed?" Yes. At this question, Mok Jiangun answered straightforwardly with a dazed face. At this, in Xiaoke clicked his tongue. The culprit has been revealed. During the spirit god parasitic poisoning technique, no one should have entered there. No, to be precise, one should not enter because it was dangerous. In Xiaoke, the pavilion master of primal killing frowned and looked at Mok Jiangun. But how did he survive? Rather, that was the question. At first, it was a mystery how he made the green spirit his servant spirit, but now that was even more curious. That was because the cliff valley where ghosts lost their sense of self and devoured each other was literally like hell. Yet not only did a guy who hadn't learned magic for long survive, but he also made a green spirit his servant spirit? Ask him how it happened. Yes. Tell us in detail what happened in there. What on earth could have happened there? As the two focused their attention on Mok Jiangun, the society leader, their expressions suddenly stiffened. Society leader? What did he mean by that now? Could he be referring to the society leader of Heaven and Earth Society? The society leader. However, after mentioning the society leader, Mok Jiangun whispered softly as if muttering, making it inaudible. Diviner Zhou Yuigong raised his voice and said, "What did the society leader do? Speak properly and loudly." The sect, society leader. Mok Jiangun muttered again in a trailing voice, mentioning the society leader. At this, in Xiaoke, the pavilion master of primal killing grew impatient with Mok Jiangun mentioning and muttering about the society leader, who could be considered the head of Heaven and Earth Society. He approached Mok Jiangun, grabbed his hair, pulled him close to his ear and said, "Tell him to say it properly again." Mok Jiangun, speak properly. At that command, Mok Jiangun opened his mouth again. The society leader. Yes. What about the society leader? Is there any reason for him to come? Squelch. Ugh. At that moment, in Xiaoke's eyes widened as if they would tear apart. Somehow Mok Jiangun's hand had pierced through his chest. What on earth was happening? Clearly this bastard was bound by the incantation shackle. In Xiaoke's widened pupils, Mok Jiangun was not wearing a dazed expression, but had the corners of his mouth raised in a grim smile. Chapter 88. It was something no one had anticipated. The The incantation shackle was originally designed to restrain one's will through self-oath, so like a servant spirit bound by a contract, it was absolutely impossible to disobey an order. Therefore, neither in Seok, the pavilion master of primal killing, nor diviner Zhou Yuigong, who had received the incantation oath, could have imagined such a thing would happen. Ugh. In Seok's eyes widened as if they would tear apart. Somehow Mok Jaeungun's hand had pierced through his chest. In Seok's widened pupils, Mok Jaeungun was not wearing a dazed expression, but had the corners of his mouth raised in a grim smile. This bastard, how did he? No matter how you looked at it, it wasn't the face of someone pressured by the incantation shackle. At that moment, the startled diviner Zhou Yuigong hurriedly chanted a binding spell. The wheel turns and the stone breaks, all returns to the mirror, the meaningless child. With the shackle on, if a binding spell was chanted, he would be unable to move. Cough. Swish. Enduring the pain of his pierced chest, Seok tried to move his fingers to form a hand seal. Among the forbidden secret arts he knew, there was a technique that could rapidly increase healing power by exhausting one's vital energy. However, that won't do. Crack. Arg. A scream burst from Seok's mouth. As he tried to form a hand seal, Mok Jaeungun had bent all his fingers backward. Due to his pierced chest, he couldn't even scream properly. The pain was agonizing, but with the thought that he might really die like this, he desperately tried to chant a spell with his mouth. Bai Jiang. Mouth. Ku. At that moment, Mok Jaeungun struck Seok's uvula with the blade of his hand between his thumb and index finger. Seok hit in the uvula, coughed up blood and writhed in agony. He had to somehow cast a spell, but Mok Jaeungun didn't give him a chance to do so. This bastard. Seeing him in agony, Mok Jaeungun smirked and said, "As expected, a diviner who can't use spells is worse than an ordinary person." These mocking words from Mok Jaeungun did not reach Seok's ears. He had already completely lost consciousness. The pain was so severe that he was on the verge of dying. At that sight, Zhou Yuigong shouted with a distorted face. "What? Weren't you being restrained?" At his shout, Mok Jaeungun smiled brightly and said, "Who knows? Why could that be?" There was no need to explain it one by one. Of course, the reason it didn't work was that the name Mok Jaeungun was not his real name in the first place, so the incantation oath was meaningless. Diviner Zhou Yuigong glared at Mok Jaeungun with a fierce expression. This bastard. He didn't know what was going on, but the incantation shackle didn't work on Mok Jaeungun. Naturally, there was no way he would reveal the reason it didn't work. At this, Zhou Yuigong quickly made a decision. Pat. He had to distance himself from Mok Jaeungun. Since the guy was from a martial arts background, if the distance was close, it would be dangerous for himself. "I apologize." His master Seok was already as good as dead. Since he didn't teach the forbidden secret art of resurrection even to some of his disciples, there was no way to save him. Zhou Yuigong took something out of the pouch at his waist while distancing himself. They were wooden figurines with talismans attached. Wooden figurine spell. He threw 3 wooden figurines with that written on them in front of Seok. And he quickly formed hand seals and chanted a spell. Ghost wolf, the yellow bridge is alive and well, the 5 prohibited acts are the god's will, the face of the bridge is the wind and the beast, the 4 seasons and 8 festivals are the sacrifices, the fragrant incense is offered daily, the fierce and the bright, the sun rises in the east, the god's talisman is unparalleled, the kitchen is in the north, the 5 peaks, the great old lord, hurry up. As soon as the chant ended, tremble. The wooden figurines trembled like crazy, and then the soil on the ground stuck to them. Then the soil that stuck to them transformed into giant figures whose height was at least 2 heads taller than ordinary adult males. Who? The transformed wooden figurines held swords in both hands and took a stance. Seeing this, Mok Jaeungun's eyes sparkled with interest. This was a technique that diviner Zhou Yuigong had not taught him. "What kind of technique is this? Do you think I'll tell you, bastard?" Zhou Yuigong shouted. Of course, he had no intention of telling him. This was a technique he hadn't even taught his master Seok. They were willow spirit generals. One created by carving a willow tree over 100 years old, placing it in a shrine, and infusing it with spiritual energy for a long time to deal with martial artists. It took a tremendous amount of effort to create just one, and it took 10 years to create 3 of them. For diviner Zhou Yuigong, it could be considered his secret technique. You stubborn bastard, release the master at once. Chuck. Zhou Yuigong formed the Jiamjialji hand seal and pointed at Mok Jiangun. Pa-pa-pa-pa-pak. Then the Willow Spirit Generals surrounded Mok Jiangun with remarkably fast movements. Each one of them was stronger than a fierce beast level when it came to skill. Of course, they were not as strong as a monstrous beast level. Nevertheless, 3 Willow Spirit Generals stronger than fierce beasts were enough to take pride in being able to face even the peak realm masters spoken of by martial artists. The guy still lacks experience. On the other hand, he had sparred dozens of times in preparation for battles with martial artists due to his friendship with the Underworld King. His master in Seok had told him to spend that time refining his spiritual power instead, but Zhou Yuigong believed that he should prepare to some extent for battles with martial artists as well. The result was the Willow Spirit Generals. It was a mistake. Zhou Yuigong clicked his tongue inwardly. Blinded by the guy's innate talent, he had accepted him, but that bastard was nothing more than a mongrel who could not be controlled by anyone. To him, Mok Jiangun said with a smile, "You still have a lot to learn, master." "Shut up. Who's your master? Wasn't it said that once a master, always a master?" Gur. Thinking that Mok Jiangun's words were mocking him, diviner Zhou Yuigong gritted his teeth, feeling absurd. A disciple accepted into the sect had killed the Grand Master. Such cases were absolutely rare. "I was foolish to think I could control you, bastard." Diviner Zhou Yuigong formed hand seals and shouted, pointing at Mok Jiangun, "Kill the..." It would be better not to do that. If you keep doing that, the Grand Master here might pass away soon. Are you okay with that?" At those words, Zhou Yuigong was dumbfounded. Once his hand had pierced through the chest, it was already a lost life. Rather, it was strange that he was still breathing. How could he save him? "You're deliberately stalling for time, but it's useless. Master, you're too quick to throw away the opportunity I'm offering you." What nonsense was this bastard spouting now? As he was thinking that, Mok Jiangun spoke in a meaningful voice. "You want to become the next Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, don't you?" At those words, diviner Zhou Yuigong hesitated for a moment before giving the order to kill the guy. What was he saying now? Zhou Yuigong spoke in a chilling voice. "Are you crazy, bastard? What do you mean? Are you saying that since the master will die, an opportunity has arisen for me to become the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing?" It was so absurd that he let out a dry cough. Even if one coveted a higher position and killed the person above, did he think that position would become his? Moreover, in Seok, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing had 3 disciples. Among them, the closest to being the successor was naturally the eldest brother disciple, Zhou Taichong of Bangwon. Therefore, if the master died, the opportunity would become even more distant. "I guess you don't have much attachment to the position. Kill him." It seemed he shouldn't listen to the guy's words any longer. He kept trying to deceive him with words, but he had now become certain of one thing. This guy had to be killed no matter what. He wasn't someone he could control. Pa-pa-pa-pa-pak. As soon as the order was given, the 3 Willow Spirit Generals surrounding Mok Jiangun simultaneously charged at him. At that very moment, whoosh, iron chains erupted from the ground and restrained the bodies of the Willow Spirit Generals all at once. What? The one who did this was none other than the Green Spirit Gusoha. "You damn diviner. You think I'll let you touch my master?" "What the?" Diviner Zhou Yuigong frowned. That green spirit had clearly exhausted a lot of spiritual energy and was in a state where he couldn't exert such strength. But somehow his appearance had almost returned to normal. What kind of trick did he use? It wasn't night and there was no situation to obtain energy to recover spiritual power. As he couldn't understand, Mok Jiangun suddenly grabbed the head of the dying in Seok, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing. And then he ripped out the heart that was inside the chest. It was truly shocking. After becoming a diviner, he had seen all sorts of gruesome things and countless corpses. But seeing his master who had taught him magic having his heart ripped out while alive, his feelings were beyond words. This guy is really... To the dumbfounded Zhou Yuigong, Mok Jiangun said, twitching his lips, "I'll give you one last chance." "What?" If you take my hand even now, you won't lose anything, Master. No matter how you try to deceive me with your words, I won't believe. Squish. At that moment, the heart in Mok Jaeungun's hand was crushed. Soon Mok Jaeungun shoved that crushed heart into the mouth of In Seok-hae, the pavilion master of primal killing, whose breath had stopped. Seeing this, diviner Zhou Yuigong's eyes trembled. Because the moment he saw this, he could guess what Mok Jaeungun was trying to do. Six-person spirit summoning technique? Six-person spirit summoning technique. It was a forbidden secret art for creating living corpse ghosts. If one fed the blood of one's own heart, which could be considered the source of oneself, to someone who had just died, and gathered the negative energy of those who had not been dead for long in one place and performed the technique, this would be born a living corpse ghost. It would transform into a being befitting that name. However, living corpse ghosts were even more difficult to create than ordinary corpse ghosts or jiangshi. The effectiveness is too low. That was because in order to create a single living corpse ghost, nearly 30 people had to be killed and their energy gathered in one place, and living corpse ghosts had too many weaknesses. If they couldn't periodically kill people and fill themselves with the negative energy of the dead, their bodies would rot, so their effectiveness was extremely low. Endless sacrifices were required for a living corpse without its own will, so it became a technique banned by the 36 Valleys of Bangwon. Of course, this wasn't a problem for the diviners of the Primal Killing Pavilion, who originally practiced forbidden techniques, but, Diviner Zhou Yuigong clicked his tongue. By what means was he going to turn the Valley Master into a living corpse ghost now? 30 people had to be killed and their corpse energy had to be filled in the body to replace the heart, but even if he killed all the collapsed people here, there were only 10 of them. Mok Jaeungun formed incantation hand seals with his hands instead of talismans. And he began to chant a spell. Purify the earth and nurture the golden corpse. The weak enters the fairy realm. One transforms into 10,000. It's a foolish act. Unless you bury the newly dead around and gather their negative energy, a living corpse ghost absolutely cannot. Twitch. It was at that moment. The body of In Seok-hae, the pavilion master of primal killing, whose head was being held by Mok Jaeungun's hand, moved. Seeing this, diviner Zhou Yuigong's eyes widened. What on earth was happening? Then he even made a sound from his mouth. Those symptoms of blinking his rolled-back white eyes were the signs of turning into a living corpse ghost. At that sight, Zhou Yuigong was at a loss for words. Impossible. The negative energy of the dead was not sufficient, so how could this happen? As he was thinking that, at some point the pupils in Seok-hae's eyes came back to life. Then Mok Jaeungun released his hand from the head. Thud. The staggering In Seok-hae soon stood up straight with his own strength. Ma Master. Diviner Zhou Yuigong called out to In Seok-hae, the pavilion master of primal killing, like that. At that call, In Seok-hae slightly turned his head, then shifted his gaze toward Mok Jaeungun with a dazed expression. Then he staggered over and knelt on both knees. Seeing this, diviner Zhou Yuigong was truly shocked beyond words. Without fulfilling the condition of the negative energy of the dead, he had really succeeded in the six-person spirit summoning technique. This guy is... As he was bewildered, Mok Jaeungun turned his head, smiled at diviner Zhou Yuigong and said, "Do you still not want to take the opportunity?" The moment he heard this, chills ran down his entire body. Chapter 89. Do you still not want to take the opportunity? The moment he heard this, chills ran down his entire body. That smile reaching up to his ears looked so full of malice. I took this guy too lightly. He had thought of him as a novice with outstanding talent but still had much to learn. But now that he looked at him, that wasn't the case. This guy was no different from a beast that would tear into you the moment you showed the slightest weakness. Zhou Yuigong's eyes darted back and forth. The three Willow Spirit Generals still bound by the iron chains and unable to break free. In Seok-hae, his master and the pavilion master of primal killing, who had become a living corpse ghost through the six-person spirit summoning technique and lost his own will. The strength gradually drained from diviner Zhou Yuigong's clenched fists. He did have a hidden trump card. But strangely he felt it wouldn't work on that guy. I had a disturbing dream. Something like today's events must have been the reason. A turning point in life, so to speak. It seemed to have occurred. After briefly looking up at the sky and letting out a long sigh, diviner Zhou Yuigong lowered his head and parted his lips. If I accept the opportunity, what do I gain? You've made a good choice. At his words, Mok Jeongun nodded as if it was natural and tried to approach. Don't come closer. I haven't made a decision yet. Answer my question. Didn't I tell you earlier? I said I would help you become the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing. Mok Jeongun pointed at In Seok, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, with a nod. At this, Diviner Zhou Yuigong's eyes narrowed. It seemed to imply that he would control the master and make him hand over that position to him. But there was a problem here. Do you think my senior brother won't notice that our master has become a living corpse ghost? Will he notice? With just his spiritual power and magical skills, senior brother is already on par with my master. If they meet in person, he will definitely notice. Senior brother Zhou Taichong. It was said that In Seok, the Pavilion Master of Primal Killing, accepted him as a disciple 30 years ago. His talent was so outstanding that it was no exaggeration to say he was already selected as the next Pavilion Master of Primal Killing due to his excellent spiritual power. It wasn't easy to deceive the eyes and senses of such a senior brother. At this, Mok Jeongun said with a smile. Shouldn't you make sure they don't meet in person until the Grand Master hands over the position, Master? What? I've set the table for you. Do I need to spoon-feed you too? I think you should naturally be able to do that much. At these words from Mok Jeongun, Diviner Zhou Yuigong silently stared at him. Was he saying to be prepared for this level of risk? Zhou Yuigong silently clicked his tongue inwardly. Then he said, I understand. If you transfer part of the control over the living corpse ghost to me as well, I'll somehow manage that. Is that all? No. There are 2 more things. 2 things. Yes. Cooperating with you means I also have to be prepared to lose everything I've built up until now. So you need more compensation for that? Mok Jeongun's voice became somewhat softer. It signified that he was becoming emotionally uncomfortable. But Diviner Zhou Yuigong had no intention of backing down either. He thought that if he didn't firmly establish it here, he would end up being dragged around by the guy in an ambiguous manner. So what do you want? The 6-person spirit summoning technique. The 6-person spirit summoning technique? I want the secret you possess. Mok Jeongun's 6-person spirit summoning technique that succeeded without fulfilling the condition of the negative energy of the dead. Seeing this, Diviner Zhou Yuigong was inwardly shocked beyond words. What kind of trick did he use to make this possible? This purely stimulated a strong curiosity as a diviner. I want to know. Mok Jeongun's 6-person spirit summoning technique could be said to have compensated for the existing weaknesses, to put it mildly. If the numerous sacrifices required to create a single living corpse ghost could be omitted, there was no technique with higher effectiveness. Will he really teach me? To be honest, he was half in doubt. If it were himself or his master in Seok, they wouldn't share this secret with anyone. However, if that's what you want, I'll teach you. What? For a moment, Zhou Yuigong stared at Mok Jeongun with a blank expression. He would teach this. He had just blurted it out thinking it was worth a try. His real goal was what came next. But he never thought Mok Jeongun would really say he would teach the secret of the 6-person spirit summoning technique. At this, Zhou Yuigong asked with a somewhat excited, trembling gaze. Is that true? Didn't you say you wanted that as compensation? Yes. Seeing the strength in his voice, Mok Jeongun smiled with a snort. Seemed he really wanted the secret. Of course, teaching that wasn't a difficult task. However, will he be able to do it just by knowing? Only he himself, with a unique constitution capable of absorbing the negative energy of the dead, could do it. If what the blue spirit said was true, living beings couldn't accept negative energy into their bodies. Therefore, even if he knew, it would be utterly useless. What is the last third compensation? At this question from Mok Jeongun, Diviner Zhou Yuigong, who couldn't hide his excitement, composed himself and said, Since we've agreed to work together, make an oath to me. An oath? What do you mean? If you swear not to harm me or seek my life, I will sincerely help you. This was more important than the other compensations. Seeing this guy, he had no hesitation in killing someone if necessary. Therefore, he wanted to firmly establish it here. Of course, even if he made that oath here, he would never believe it. It was just that if he made the oath, he would try to maintain it for a while according to his needs, so he was just trying to buy time. And since I've demanded this much compensation, he'll believe I'll faithfully follow him. His real goal was here. He would devise a plan after making the guy trust him. By what means could he trust and follow a guy who nonchalantly killed even the Grand Master? Diviner Zhou Yuigong said, hiding his true intentions. What will you do? If you're uneasy, of course I should do it for you. Somehow this guy's words sounded polite, but there was something that subtly grated on his nerves. But since it was a situation where he had to lower himself, he didn't show it. It was truly coincidental how the situation had reversed in just half a month. As he was thinking that, there's a way to make you feel most at ease, Master. A way to feel at ease. What was he trying to say? As he was puzzled, Mok Jiangun took off the incantation shackle on his wrist, shook it and said, "If you wear this and make an oath to me, it should be fine." What? For a moment Zhou Yuigong was dumbfounded. Was he telling him to wear that and make an incantation oath now? You bastard, are you seriously saying that? Bind him. Whoosh. As soon as he finished speaking, the iron chains of the green spirit Gusoha erupted from the ground and restrained his body. Damn it! At this, Zhou Yuigong tried to move his fingers to quickly form a hand seal. Tap. But it was at that very moment. Huh. What the? As he was thinking that, Mok Jiangun had already reached him. The distance was about 10 steps, but he arrived in the blink of an eye, startling Zhou Yuigong, who hurriedly tried to complete the hand seal. However, before that, Mok Jiangun grabbed his wrist first. Grip. Ugh. He gripped it so tightly that he was seized by pain as if his wrist would break. Unable to breathe properly due to the agony, Mok Jiangun said, "I'm telling you this because you seem to have some misunderstanding, but I'm giving you the opportunity so that you can be a more voluntarily loyal dog. Let go of this." Clank. Mok Jiangun put the incantation shackle on the wrist of the agonized Zhou Yuigong. Then he smiled brightly and said, "If you trust and follow me, Master, why would I need to harm you? So make the oath like I did last time." Zhou Yuigong, whose wrist was grabbed, writhed in pain. It really felt like it would break. Or you can keep enduring. It would be fun to break them one by one. This bastard. He looked at Mok Jiangun in agony, but he was smirking at him as if enjoying this. Seeing that, Zhou Yuigong realized he had no choice. This guy was enjoying this situation. If he didn't make the oath, he would really do as he said. At this, Zhou Yuigong barely endured the pain and said, I, Zhou Yuigong, will follow the will of Mok Jiangun." Don't say Mok Jiangun, but Zhong will do." What? Zhou Yuigong's eyes trembled. Ha! Now the question was solved. The incantation contract could only restrain one's will if it was made with one's real name. Naturally, since he was the son of the Yun Mok Sword Manor and they all called him Mok Jiangun, he had never doubted it. But he had lied about his name? To fall for such an absurd trick was utterly disheartening. Now stop being surprised and do it properly, shall we? Mok Jiangun applied more strength to his hand. At this, Zhou Yuigong hurriedly said, I, Zhou Yuigong, will follow the will of Zhong." As soon as he finished speaking, the shackle rattled and trembled. Then Mok Jiangun released the wrist he was holding. Gasp, gasp. Zhou Yuigong, whose face had turned bright red and was drenched in sweat from the pain, gripped his wrist and gritted his teeth. To even make an incantation oath to the guy he had accepted as a disciple. How did it come to this? As he was agonizing, Mok Jiangun placed his hand on his shoulder and said with a smile, "I'm so grateful that you're helping your disciple like this, Master. What have I done?" It seemed he had accepted a demon as a disciple. This place was Honghaibang, a brothel located on the outskirts of the outer city of Heaven and Earth Society. There, a seductive and beautiful woman was squinting her eyes and trying to look at the distant mountains. She was Ha Chai-rin, a candidate for the sect leader of Flying Killing Sect, one of the 3 major assassination groups, or rather Go Chan, who was possessing her body. Damn it! Where should I set my eyes? Go Chan was truly distressed. With the help of a makeup artist, he had successfully applied makeup. When the skills of the brothel's makeup artist, who could be considered a master, touched Ha Chai-rin's face, which was quite beautiful even without makeup, it transformed into an even more radiant flower. It's driving me crazy. But there was only one reason why Go Chan was so distressed. There was nowhere to look. The place he was in now was the common room where the courtesans of the brothel waited. and their clothes were all so thin that the inside was completely visible if you stared a little. "Oh my, sister. Aren't you putting too much effort there? You fool. If you don't put in effort on a day like today, what will you do? You're also fully prepared with your skin showing through." You're right. How could I miss an opportunity like today? At the conversation of the courtesans who were overflowing with enthusiasm, Go-chan only pricked up his ears and turned his head toward the ceiling. According to what he heard, a tremendous guest had made a reservation today. He had asked to prepare the courtesans who were the most skilled in entertaining and had the best looks, so this was the situation. "I heard someone with a quite high position in Heaven and Earth Society is coming." At the makeup artist's words, he thought it made sense and asked to be included, but this was truly a difficult situation. Out of the 40 or so courtesans here, only 6 could go inside. So they were checking each other while calling each other sister. And it was no joke. They were smiling and engaging in a battle of energy, and it was exhausting. Even the thought of having to go this far and infiltrate Heaven and Earth Society for the sake of his master Mok Jung-un crossed his mind. As he was thinking that, someone approached Go-chan. "Hey you. Newbie. I'm talking to you." At that call, Go-chan pointed at himself with his hand. Then, the mature-looking courtesan who appeared to be in her mid-20s snorted and said, "You're not even answering when your sister's talking to you. What an amazing newbie. Who told you to come into this room?" What should I say about this? For a courtesan, mid-20s was quite old, but his actual age was different from this body. So he couldn't readily say anything. He definitely had to act, but his male pride wouldn't allow him to say, "Sister." Damn it. At this, Go-chan bowed his head to avoid unnecessary trouble. "You're not answering until the end?" As soon as he did that, the courtesan in her 20s suddenly tried to slap Go-chan's cheek. There was no way Go-chan, possessing the body of a peak realm master, could be slapped. Swish. He lightly dodged the courtesan's flying wrist. At this, the courtesan raised her eyebrows and raised her voice. "Oh my. You dodged your sister's hand." Go-chan, who thought it would be tiresome to deal with her further, waved his hands and said, "Look here, young lady. I have no intention of fighting with you. So let's stop here." At these words from Go-chan, the courtesan's expression turned blank. What's with that uncle-like way of speaking? At the courtesan's words, Go-chan realized his mistake. He should have tried to imitate the way young women spoke to some extent, but he had made a mistake in trying to avoid trouble. Then the courtesan said, "If you dodge your sister's hand again this time, you better be prepared." The courtesan seemed to need to slap him somehow to feel satisfied. At this, Go-chan said with a serious expression, "You keep calling me sister, sister, but young lady, no, I'm probably older than you." "What? Even though I look like this, I'm 27. Go-chan spoke an age that seemed older than her. Seeing how she kept calling him sister and asserting hierarchy, he thought that if he mentioned an older age, she might let it go. He couldn't ruin the plan by unnecessarily causing a dispute here. Then the courtesan snorted and said, "Is that so? You're a newbie, but you're quite old despite your appearance. Ahem. So let's stop this pointless battle of energy here." Swish. The courtesan rolled up both her sleeves and spoke as if she wanted everyone to hear. "Watch closely. This is a fight between sisters." Go-chan seriously contemplated whether he should change this plan. Chapter 90. On the way back to the inner castle of Heaven and Earth Society, Diviner Zhou Yuigong had a complicated expression as he looked at the back of the old man walking ahead of him. The old man silently walking was his master and the pavilion master of primal killing in Siu. Sigh. How did it come to this? That fearsome master now moved according to his commands. The reason was because he had received partial control from Mok Jung-un. "I'll let you command him as agreed." It was the only compensation Mok Jung-un kept. None of the other conditions were kept. The second proposal, the secret of the 6-person spirit summoning technique, was not taught, saying it would be impossible to do even if taught, and the third turned out like this, as you can see. Clank. The incantation shackle on his wrist had turned him into a slave instead. Now he had to follow the guy regardless of his will. "I'll stay at Corpse Blood Valley, so master, please go back and become the pavilion master of primal killing." Damn it. He casually gave such an order to him. Although he received control over his master in Seok, who had become a living corpse ghost, He couldn't recklessly take over the position. There were procedures and he needed a proper justification. What should I do? As expected, the biggest problem was senior brother Zhou Taichong. Primal Killing Pavilion had been skilled in hand seal-based magic and corpse ghost techniques using dead bodies for generations. However, senior brother Zhou Taichong was not only skilled in hand seal-based magic but also in servant spirit techniques, so he had even subjugated a monstrous beast-level creature that even his master couldn't handle. It's not for nothing that he's called the next pavilion master of primal killing. If his senior brother found out that their master had become a living corpse ghost, a big problem would arise. No, his limbs could be torn apart by the monstrous beast in an instant. He had to find a way to naturally deceive senior brother. It's giving me a headache. But something had been strange for a while. There was something he couldn't remember, but he didn't know what it was. What order did Mok Jung-un give him with the incantation that made him lose part of his memory? It's unsettling. What could it be? So it can be used that way too. Mok Jung-un thought the order he had given to diviner Zhou Yuigong earlier was quite useful. The order Mok Jung-un gave was simple. Forget that you heard my real name when making the incantation oath. Keep remembering me as the third son of the Yun Mok Sword Manor. He wasn't sure if this would really work, but it actually did. It was possible because the principle was to restrain one's own will. He wanted to obtain a few more of these incantation shackles. Can I get more? I want to, but it's difficult. According to diviner Zhou Yuigong, the incantation shackle was a magic tool created by great monk Myong Ryol, one of the 6 directions gods, and was one of the 4 that his master in Seok had received as a gift while attending the general meeting of the 64 diviner sects. Even his master in Seok had tried to uncover this secret and conducted research for over 10 years, but failed to recreate this principle. What a pity! But there were 3 more besides the one he put on Zhou Yuigong, so he wanted to obtain them if he had the chance. Anyway, thanks to that, he erased the memory of mentioning his real name from diviner Zhou Yuigong's mind. It wouldn't be a problem. Then shall we continue the conversation from earlier? Mok Jung-un said to Li Jiom, the master of Corpse Blood Valley. This was Li Jiom's office. Having returned here immediately, Mok Jung-un was about to finish the conversation and ask what he was curious about. What could be the secret of the blue spirit? At that moment, the blue spirit's voice echoed in Mok Jung-un's ears. Hey, mortal. I'm sorry, but it seems difficult to answer right now. He couldn't respond because Li Jiom, the master of Corpse Blood Valley, was sitting across from him. But then she spoke in a serious voice. I sincerely ask you. Don't ask now. Why? Didn't she become a ghost for revenge and accept him as a disciple despite disliking him? But why didn't she want to hear this? He didn't understand. As he was puzzled, the blue spirit said, even if not now, you will eventually find out when the time comes. Instead, if you do as I say, I will teach you one of the 8 forms of thought destruction. At her words, Mok Jung-un's eyes narrowed. She was someone who didn't give any clues about the forms, saying that one had to realize them on their own. But now she was saying she would teach him one of the forms she had realized. It was a slightly tempting offer. If you agree to my words, make a circle with your index finger and thumb. At this, Mok Jung-un moved the fingers he had placed on his thigh. Then, the blue spirit snorted as if dumbfounded. It was because Mok Jung-un hadn't drawn a circle with his fingers, but stretched out his index and middle fingers. It meant he wanted her to teach him not 1 but 2. You never settle for a loss, do you? Even knowing one of the 8 forms of thought destruction was infinitely useful and valuable. However, she thought the forms she had realized could be more harmful than helpful even if Mok Jung-un knew them now, so she hadn't taught him. So she was trying to teach him one form that was relatively safe, but, fine you greedy bastard. In the end she agreed to teach him. She wasn't sure if he could embody what she had realized, but she didn't want Mok Jung-un to know about this matter right now. No, she herself didn't want to hear how it was revealed either. He had a guess anyway. When you're ready. It wouldn't be too late to hear it then. With their agreement reached, Mok Jung-un said to Li Jiom, the master of Corpse Blood Valley, who was about to speak to continue the conversation. That day. Please wait a moment. Yes. Can we hear that story later? Hear it later. But don't you need to know what really happened back then to understand the situation of the sect? Let's have this conversation after my position is a bit more established. After your position is established? To the puzzled Li Jiong, Mok Jaeun pointed at himself and said, "In your eyes, Valley Master, what level do I seem to be at now?" "Level. In martial arts." "Martial arts. At this, Li Jiong slightly frowned, then looked Mok Jaeun up and down. Then, in a voice that didn't seem fully confident, he said, "Is it all right if I speak honestly?" "Yes. Just based on the energy I sense, you feel like a first-rate martial artist." "First-rate?" At his words, Mok Jaeun tilted his head slightly. He still had almost no clear realization of the energy corresponding to the peak realm. However, the amount of death energy he possessed had reached the pinnacle of peak realm. Moreover, his open middle danjian was also filled with condensed energy reaching the pinnacle of peak realm, so he could be said to have twice as much energy as a master of the same level. Can he not feel the energy? As he was puzzled, the blue spirit's voice was heard. Perhaps that could be the case. In the first place, humans cannot accumulate or feel the energy of death in their bodies. At most, they would feel a chill or coldness. Moreover, even if such death energy is gathered in the danjian, it would be strange for ordinary people to accurately sense it. Is that so? As the blue spirit said, death energy was completely different from ordinary energy, so even a great master like Li Jiong, the Valley Master of Corpse Blood Valley, might have difficulty grasping it? No, come to think of it, this could be a good thing. If the opponent doesn't know my level, I can deceive them. This alone had considerable value. After all, letting one's guard down was useful for creating the opponent's weakness. Then Li Jiong carefully asked, "Could it be that you are deliberately concealing your energy, my liege?" The strength of that person that Li Jiong had heard from his grandfather was no exaggeration to say that she was among the top 3, even among the strongest people in the history of heaven and earth society. Therefore he thought this couldn't be all. However, no. What you see is what it is. Is that true? Yes. At Mok Jaeun's words, Li Jiong let out a sigh mixed with some disappointment. That was understandable, as Li Jiong thought that person had possessed this boy's body as a ghost to take revenge and regain her past glory and honor. He naturally thought she would be prepared. But if that wasn't the case, what was his liege going to do in this situation? You seem quite disappointed. That's... He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. To him, Mok Jaeun said with a smile, "Of course you would think that. But it's only been half a month since I possessed this body, and at that time, this body wasn't even third-rate." At Mok Jaeun's words, Li Jiong's eyes sparkled with interest. It was reasonable, as this meant his liege had reached the first-rate realm in just half a month. If this was true, it could be considered a tremendous rate of progress. Is that true? Yes. You don't believe me? No. How could that be? I'm just surprised. Even with outstanding martial talent, this speed was beyond common sense. Li Jiong's reaction was natural. At this, Mok Jaeun said, "I know you have expectations, but even if my past self that you know is different, I'm also in a position where I have to start from the beginning again." Ah. At those words, Li Jiong nodded as if he understood. Then he carefully asked, "Then how long do you think it will take for you to recover to your original level, my liege?" That was the key point. Li Jiong was in a highly excited state after making the loyalty oath. He wanted to leave this Corpse Blood Valley immediately and regain honor together as the right-hand man of his liege. To his question, Mok Jaeun pondered for a moment. Original level? Actually, come to think of it, Mok Jaeun had never heard about the level of martial arts Chong Ryong possessed when she was alive. She herself always talked about how strong she was, but the standard for that was vague. However, seeing even the strong Li Jiong having reverence, it seemed she was definitely stronger than he thought. Then, it seemed good to set a target period to some extent. A gentleman's revenge is not late even after 10 years. It meant that a gentleman's revenge, even if it takes 10 years, is not too late, and to be patient, build up strength and wait for the right time. Of course, it was natural to cultivate patience for revenge, but 10 years was too long. So, the period Mok Jaeun had in mind was... Swish. Li Jiong's expression stiffened at the fingers Mok Jaeun held up. Are you crazy? The blue spirit's voice was heard in Mok Jaeun's ears. Why were they reacting like this? As he was puzzled, Mok Jaeun was only holding up 2 fingers. The blue spirit clicked her tongue as if dumbfounded. Meanwhile, Li Jiong, the master of Corpse Blood Valley, spoke in a slightly trembling voice. Could it be 20 years? No. That's too long. At those words, Li Jiom gulped and continued speaking as if he couldn't believe it. Is that really possible for you? Is there anything I can't do? An answer without a moment's hesitation. At this, Li Jiom let out an exclamation with eyes full of genuine reverence. He was trying to set the target period as short as possible and aim for it, but was this level of reaction necessary? Then the blue spirit clicked her tongue and said, "A guy who hasn't even gained proper realization of the peak realm is boasting that he will surpass the barrier and reach the realm of transformation within 2 years." Transformation realm. It was the supreme martial arts realm that could only be reached by surpassing the barrier and attaining the states of 3 flowers gathered at the crown, 1, and 5 energies paying homage to the origin. It was said that only the 6 heavens and 8 stars, 3, known as the greatest masters in the current martial arts world, had reached that realm. Yet Mok Jaeongun had declared that he would reach the same level as them in 2 years. Is it difficult? As if reading Mok Jaeongun's thoughts, the blue spirit said, "Die and wake up 100 times. See if that's possible. No, if that happens, I will call you Lord for the rest of my life and attend to you." Chapter 91. Transformation Realm. It was the supreme martial arts realm that could only be reached by surpassing the barrier and attaining the states of 3 flowers gathered at the crown and 5 energies paying homage to the origin. Yet he had declared that he would reach that level in 2 years despite not having gained realization of the peak realm. Is it difficult? As if reading Mok Jaeongun's thoughts, the blue spirit said, "Die and wake up 100 times. See if that's possible. No, if that happens, I will call you Lord for the rest of my life and attend to you. You're coming on quite strong." Mok Jaeongun twitched the corners of his mouth. The reason the blue spirit was clicking her tongue and coming on so strong was simple. First of all, even she, who was called a genius that appeared once in a few hundred years, had taken 20 years to reach the realm of transformation. Of course, even this was achieved at the young age of 28, so everyone was shocked beyond words. It's not like the era has disappeared now. In the past, there was a time when the martial arts world had experienced a glorious golden age. There was a period when an unparalleled genius appeared and led the martial arts world at a young age, known as the Little Sword Immortal, but that's not the case now. I hope you keep that promise. Pardon? Li Jiom, the master of Corpse Blood Valley, asked back as if wondering what Mok Jaeongun's sudden words meant. At this, Mok Jaeongun shook his head. He didn't intend to say it out loud, but it was meant for the blue spirit to hear. Wait and see after 2 years. You will know the greatness of this venerable. Mok Jaeongun smiled faintly at the blue spirit's bold claim. Just from her reaction and that of Li Jiom, the master of Corpse Blood Valley, he realized he had made an absurd declaration, but his grandfather always said something. You know nothing until you try. Even your nature. ZZZT. Pai Liege. When Mok Jaeongun brought his hand to his forehead and let out a groan, Li Jiom, the master of Corpse Blood Valley, asked in puzzlement. To his question, Mok Jaeongun slightly frowned. What was that just now? He was someone who never forgot something once he remembered it. He even remembered all the words his grandfather had said to him since he was young, but he couldn't remember what he had said after those words just now. Why is that? When he tried to recall it, his head hurt as if it would crack. He could endure ordinary pain, but this pain was so severe as if his brain was being cut out, that he couldn't help but grimace. Why is this happening? His grandfather had said something to him afterward, but he couldn't remember. If he tried to uncover it as if it was forcibly hidden, he got a headache. A memory shrouded in fog. In the end, Mok Jaeongun stopped trying to forcibly recall it. Could it be? Did his grandfather do this? A small doubt arose. But his grandfather had no knowledge of acupuncture or anything like that and hadn't done anything special to him. He felt puzzled, but now was not the time to keep thinking about it. Mok Jaeongun relaxed his expression and said, "It's nothing. By the way, may I ask a few questions?" "Feel free to do so." Li Jiom, who had been looking at him with a worried face, answered. At this, Mok Jaeongun asked, "Do you happen to know someone named Ghost Blade?" To that question, Li Jiom, the master of Corpse Blood Valley, answered casually, "Is there anyone who doesn't know Ghost Blade, one of the 8 stars?" Ghost Blade. Excluding the 6 heavens who stand at the pinnacle of the current martial arts world, He is one of the 8 masters known to have reached the highest realm. I don't know much about the current state of the martial arts world. Ah. Li Jiom nodded as if he understood. The time when his ghostly liege was active was a whopping 100 years ago, so the masters who were renowned then and now could be said to be completely different. At this, Li Jiom said, Ghost Blade's sect and identity are unknown. He suddenly appeared one day and rose to notoriety by engaging in life-and-death duels with masters who were known for their righteous deeds. Notoriety? Yes. It couldn't be called fame because none of those who fought him survived. No one survived? Yes. That's why his notoriety was quite high. Huh. At those words, Mok Jiong'un tilted his head. Mok Indan, the head of the Yun Mok Sword Manor, had said he had fought him and was injured. Could it be that that fact was hardly known? As he was puzzled, Li Jiom exclaimed, "Ah," as if he had remembered something and said, "There is exactly one person who survived." Someone survived? Yes. It must be the head of the Yun Mok Sword Manor. Mok Jiong'un was naturally convinced of that, but he asked without showing it. Who is that? I heard that Baek Saha, the Annihilating Poison King one of the 5 kings of our sect, fought Ghost Blade for dozens of moves. What? Wasn't it the head of the Yun Mok Sword Manor, Mok Indan? Someone completely different from his expectation was mentioned. At this, Mok Jiong'un asked back. He fought Ghost Blade? Yes. It's quite a famous anecdote in our sect. I remember that the Annihilating Poison King unexpectedly fought him a few months before Ghost Blade disappeared. At these words from Li Jiom, Mok Jiong'un frowned. For now he could learn 2 facts from Li Jiom's words. One was that Li Jiom was also unaware of the fact that Mok Indan, the head of the Yun Mok Sword Manor, had fought Ghost Blade and survived. And the second fact he learned was a bit disappointing. Mok Jiong'un had come here thinking that Ghost Blade might be a master of heaven and earth society. But if he had fought someone called the Annihilating Poison King, one of the high-ranking executives here, they might not be on the same side but in an adversarial relationship. Did I make the wrong guess? Should he have gone to the Imperial Palace if he had known this would happen? As he was thinking that, Li Jiom asked, Is there a problem? I had heard that Ghost Blade was a hidden master of heaven and earth society. But after hearing what you said, I'm starting to think that might not be the case. He thought there was no need to mention the former if he didn't know anyway. In any case, even the head of the Yun Mok Sword Manor, Mok Indan, didn't seem to know much about Ghost Blade. Then Li Jiom said, there were quite a few such rumors as well. Quite a few rumors? Yes. That's because the people Ghost Blade targeted and killed were all masters of the righteous and evil sections. The only exception was the Annihilating Poison King, a master of our sect, and I heard that in the midst of a long duel, Ghost Blade stopped the fight first and withdrew. Withdrew first. At those words, Mok Jiong'un's eyes narrowed. Another possibility had arisen. If he exceptionally clashed with a master of heaven and earth society and withdrew first, there was a possibility that they were on the same side. So he could be a master of heaven and earth society? I don't know about that. The Annihilating Poison King also glossed over what happened at that time. But there were such rumors as well. What kind of rumors? There was also a rumor that Ghost Blade was a secret guardian who received secret orders from the society leader. Secret guardian? It seems they still maintain that system. The Blue Spirit seemed to know about this as well. Li Jiom continued. The society leader has secret guardians who constantly protect him. There are rumors that their martial arts skills are actually on par with the 5 kings. If they are on par with the 5 kings, are they strong? They are strong. Among the 5 kings, there are 2 supreme masters who have reached the realm of transformation, and the other 3 have reached the pinnacle of the transcendent realm. What? The Blue Spirit couldn't hide her surprise at this. That was understandable, as in the era when she was active, there were hardly any among the executive-level members who had reached such a realm. But had it changed so much in 100 years? How astonishing! Had the level of heaven and earth society risen to that extent? Well, back then it was the early days of heaven and earth society, and it was a period when they were still gaining strength. Considering that, it might be natural now that they had grown into one of the 3 giant forces dominating the current martial arts world. Since you said you're not familiar with the current situation, I should tell you this. The The two of the 5 kings who have reached the realm of transformation are called the 8 stars in the current martial arts world. Who? Then it made sense to some extent. If the society leader's secret guardian was strong enough to be on par with the 5 kings, it was plausible that he might be the disappeared Ghost Blade. At this, Mok Jaeongun asked, Ghost Blade's identity still hasn't been revealed, right? Yes, that's right. However, perhaps the Annihilating Poison King who dueled with him before he disappeared might know some clues. The Annihilating Poison King might know. I see. Yes. He is the only one who survived a duel with him. But it's not certain. By the way, why do you ask about this? It's not really important, so don't worry about it. At those words, Lee Ji-young, the master of Corpse Blood Valley, showed a puzzled look but soon nodded without further questioning. I understand. Seeing his attitude, Mok Jaeongun thought he was truly straightforward. He could understand why the Blue Spirit cherished the people of the Lee family. Anyway, 2 clues had emerged from this. The Annihilating Poison King, the society leader's secret guardian. The Annihilating Poison King might hold clues about Ghost Blade, and the society leader's secret guardian was a candidate who might be Ghost Blade. The mark that remained on his deceased grandfather. Mok Indan, the head of the Yun Mok Sword Manor, who had a similar scar. It won't be long. Finally, some outlines were starting to appear on this journey of revenge that began with only the clues of scars and footprints. If it was certain that the person named Ghost Blade had killed his grandfather, he was definitely a target of revenge who had to be killed. Mok Jaeongun's lips twitched. Lee Ji-young, the master of Corpse Blood Valley who was watching this, had a glimmer of interest in his eyes. Killing intent. Although he was trying his best to conceal it, the subtle killing intent leaking out was no joke. It was very intense, so to speak. He tried not to have doubts, but it was clear that his liege had quite unfavorable feelings toward the person named Ghost Blade. As he was thinking that, Mok Jaeongun said, by the way, what exactly is the purpose of Corpse Blood Valley? Pardon? I'm just going along with it to infiltrate this place, but as far as I remember, there was no such thing when I was here. You can think of it as a process of sorting out the raw gems. Raw gems? Yes. As I told you, even when you pass the second gate, the trials are a process of assigning and selecting manpower in the right places. If you pass all the way to the final gate here, you will be given a great opportunity. What is that? You will have the opportunity to join the subordinates of high-ranking executives or become their disciple. Disciple? Yes. Since you can be considered the best talent at the point of passing all the gates. The trials of Corpse Blood Valley are difficult to pass even for those called martial geniuses who have diligently trained in martial arts since childhood. But if one were to pass all these trials, they could be called the best talent. These best talents are given the opportunity to be selected by the executives attending the final gate. When you say high-ranking executives, do you mean the 5 kings? It could be the 5 kings, the 3 chief masters, and the 4 valley masters, including myself. The 5 kings, the 3 chief masters, and the 4 valley masters. They could be considered the executives and the backbone that led Heaven and Earth Society. So that's how it was. Now Mok Jaeongun understood why the boys were risking their lives in Corpse Blood Valley. If they were chosen by the executives and became their disciples, they would gain immense power within Heaven and Earth Society and learn advanced martial arts. So how could they miss this opportunity? There were reasons to seize it even at the risk of their lives. Lee Ji-young, the master of Corpse Blood Valley, cautiously said to Mok Jaeongun, "Please forgive me for the disrespect I have shown you so far, my liege." "No, it's fine. You didn't know, so what's there to forgive? Now that I know at least this much, I will have my subordinates pull some strings to get you out." "Get me out?" "That's right. Although the society leader's order was to have you participate in the trials of Corpse Blood Valley, there was no command that you must be kept alive, so we can easily process it as if you died. If that happened, the Lord would be able to escape the society leader's sight and have time to secretly recover his martial arts here in Corpse Blood Valley." That's what he thought, but Mok Jaeongun shook his head. "No. I don't think there's a need for that." "Pardon? Why would you?" There was no need for his liege to suffer through this voluntarily. If his liege, who had already reached the pinnacle of martial arts, secluded himself, wouldn't he be able to sufficiently return to his past level? As he was thinking that, Mok Jaeongun said, "We should make the most of this situation." "What do you mean by making use of this situation?" Didn't you say that if I pass the trials, I can become a disciple of the executives? That is true, but there's no need to. What kind of wound do you think would be more painful? Pardon? What did he mean by that? As he was puzzled, Mok Jae-un smiled brightly and said, "A wound that festers and bursts from the inside is really painful compared to a wound on the outside." At these words from Mok Jae-un, a glimmer appeared in the eyes of Lee Ji-youm, the master of Corpse Blood Valley. It was because he understood what Mok Jae-un meant by saying this. Thinking that he sufficiently understood, Mok Jae-un said, "Then shall I try to get a recommendation?" "By recommendation you mean? In your eyes, Valley Master, whose attention would be most beneficial among those executives?"